sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people.
New Brighton ngoba lo mfana wenu umele umzonsundu umele thina sonke usiya
Hi everyone and welcome to a brand new series proudly sponsored by Cerebos, the manufacturers of Halo Water. We welcome you to Behind Our Badge. Behind Our Badge, the first in a series of programs in which we'll take a look at the history, the origin and the sporting heritage of a number of top South African schools. Good evening. This evening we feature the Grey High School in Port Elizabeth. And with me is none other than a man who captained Eastern Province at both rugby and cricket. He was a member of the Springbok squad that took on the 1974 British and Irish Lions, a junior Springbok and a Quagga Barbarian, and most importantly of all, a very proud old grey. Welcome, Gavin Cowley. How are you doing, Gav?
Thank you, Daron. Yeah, good seeing you guys.
Now, Gavin, the best place to start any story is at the origin, at the beginning. And the man best placed to share thoughts with us on that has written a few books on the topic. You know him well. John Young, thank you for joining us on Behind Our Badge.
Yeah, I think we'll hear from the various participants this evening in terms of those that went to the school and even those that had a link with the school in some way or another, like in your case, Daron, you had a son at Grey. So, we learned so much, but I don't want to steal the thunder of everybody else. We'll leave it to that. I see John Young is actually on camera, which is good to see. John, welcome. Nice to have you on board. And just to add too as well, Daron, that the surname Young is indelibly footprinted in Port Elizabeth, as it was called, now Quebec, and the Grey School in so many ways. I'll just show you. You probably, John, you know what this is?
That was the book that I brought out when we turned 150. Spirit of the Tower was the 150th. And when we turned 100, there were three authors who put together 'Neath the Tower. So I had to work the title a little bit.
Well, I must compliment you on the content as well. I was going through it again, taking it out of my library just to have a go and have a look at it. And there's so many interesting things there that we can pick up on. And of course, we don't have enough time to do everything. But at the starting point, Sir George Grey is commonly seen as the person that actually founded the school. But I believe John Patterson had a lot to do with being a founder or certainly a benefactor or whatever else he did down in Port Elizabeth and with the Grey School.
Well, indeed. The school was named for the governor in honor of him, and because he had been supportive in the sense that he allowed the city council to take over land and he allowed the school to gain rental from some of the land to support the income of the school. But as he said at a meeting in 1858, while the school was still being built, he did relatively little. It was mostly the likes of Patterson and other energetic PE citizens who drove the idea of a new school system, which would actually be 3 schools feeding an academic institute on the hill. And Patterson, by that point, was a member of Parliament, and he was the one who introduced the Act that brought Grey High School, Grey Institute, into being.
Well, you talk about the Grey Institute. It's just as well it wasn't called the Grey Institution, because some people might have worried a little bit about the type of person that would go to that school. So over the years, then obviously Patterson played a very important role. Um, Something I didn't know, which I only found out as well through just reading up and chatting to people, was that Grey actually housed girls as well up until 1906. Is that correct?
Absolutely. As I say, there was a North End Grey and a South End Grey, and the idea was that one would qualify for the Grey School on the hill. And there were very few schools of any sort in the Cape, in what was then Port Elizabeth. And so your achieving girls, as it were, your academic girls, found a home on the hill until 1906.
Well, also, if we look back at the school when it started and that, and I don't know if this was very much a colonial thing, but there are very few schools in South Africa that have the head of the school, which we would commonly call a headmaster, that is actually called the rector. Do you have a background on that?
We have a strong suspicion that it's because they wanted to link the role with the head of the Trinity Church, which is just down the road from the Institute. One of the early advertisements suggested that it needed to be a Protestant person who was qualified from Cambridge University. But there were also some Scottish schools, and there was a very early Scottish influence in early Port Elizabeth and at the Grey High School. Of some of the Scottish schools had rectors. So there is that history.
And we look back at the many rectors that have taken their place at Grey, and one of them was a guy called William Archer Way, who was apparently quite a busy man in many ways, both in the classroom and outside the classroom, and he was a very keen cricketer. And he saw the fact that the very first grass pitch was laid for the Grey team to play on. I believe that he believed that it was right to put oxblood on the pitch. Why would he have done that?
He was a man of strong theories. I mean, mostly he was a very fine academic who could quote Latin and Shakespeare at the drop of a hat, or his mortarboard, which he often wore on his head. He opened the batting, scored centuries at will, quoted Latin, but he did have a slightly odd belief that ox blood was required to help the pitch generate. But in 1927, Grey High School got the first turf pitch in Port Elizabeth with bully imported from KZN.
And what was the background then of the move ultimately from the Donkin, the Grey Institute, to Mill Park? Was there a specific reason why it was moved to Mill Park?
Well, I think the school had grown to the point where they felt that this new remote area out in what was then, beyond the city limits, it was an ambitious move because, as you know, it's a really big plot. And what Wade did is for 3 years in a row, he took the children up there in a tram, which didn't quite stretch to where the Grey was, but they had to walk there, about 300 of them. And they planted 1,000 trees each year for 3 years in a row to stabilize the sand dunes, basically, because that's what it was in the early days. 1913 was when the move happened.
Well, the school is now 169 years old, and ultimately there were three schools at play that Sir George Grey had some say with. I don't know if John Patterson did as well, and the other two schools being Grey College and Auckland Grammar in New Zealand. How did that come about?
I don't know a lot about the New Zealand setup, but I do know that sending a check to the community of Bloemfontein to help them set up Grey College ultimately got Sir George Grey fired because he was trying to promote unity across what we now know as South Africa. But in those days, the British colonial powers wanted nothing to do with the other provinces, remembering there was no diamonds and gold. They were all poor. The Cape was poor, Natal was poor, Free State was poor. And when Grey had this ambitious project of trying to pull the Southern Africa together, they promptly fired him. So the date that he wrote his check for Grey Bloom is the date that they use as their founding, whereas Grey High School uses an Act of Parliament as the date of our founding.
Well, let's just make a correction there as well, John Young. They are not called Grey Bloemfontein. They are called Grey College.
Indeed, Grey College in Bloemfontein.
Yeah. And
If I might
the
come in here
Grey
with the final...
in Port Elizabeth.
Gavin, sorry,
Okay, just to
if I might
finish off then, John, there was another hallmark or something that was erected called an obelisk in honor, was it, of John Patterson, that still exists somewhere in Port Elizabeth.
Well, the curiosity is that there is no monument to John Patterson. And what I've suggested is that the monument that he put up for his late business partner, that at some point went up in the Market Square, it now resides completely without context in the PE Museum car park. And my idea is that it should go up in front of the Institute building on the Donkin, where you can look down on the Standard Bank, which is something that he founded, the EP Herald, which he founded, and the Grey Institute, which he founded. He was a remarkable, remarkable man.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. You know, John, we could go on for a couple of hours, and let's hope we have another opportunity maybe to delve a little bit more deeply into the Grey schools, and we talk about the junior school too, as well as the high school. Thank you so much for joining us. It's brilliant. You know, as an author, you've done a remarkable job in putting together, which you did at the 150th, of course, some time back, all this wonderful knowledge of the school. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Gavin. Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Gavin. Amongst the many great names, particularly on the sports fields, that Grey have produced over the years, is a man who played in 2 Rugby World Cup finals. He won 1 Rugby World Cup, 75 caps for England, MBE, OBE. Everyone will have heard the name of Michael Catt. And we're in the privileged position tonight of being able to catch up with the man himself. Here's Michael. Undoubtedly, one of the many international icons produced by the Grey over years is a man by the name of Michael Catt. OBE, 75 caps for England, 2 Rugby World Cup finals, 1 Rugby World Cup winners' medal. And before we pass over to Gavin Cowley to discuss more of the rugby side of things, Michael, if I could just ask you a little bit about the culture and the ethos of being a scholar at Grey. What was that like? And how did that impact on how you turned out as a man and as a rugby player?
Good evening. I think one of the key words for me would be respect. I think what I learned at school was a lot about respecting your peers, respecting your elders, and respecting the game of rugby union and what it can do for you. And what it has done for me has been an unbelievable journey, like it has done for a lot of other people as well, that have come through Grey. I think the culture was exceptionally competitive, and I think that puts you in good stead going into life. It teaches you a lot of lessons very early on as a young kid, young boy. And the other thing for me was the friendships that I've generated through my school years. You know, we're sort of 40 years on and we still met best mates, and we still talk on a regular basis. So those were the key things I think that I took from being a Grey boy.
And before I bring Gavin in here, the names like Gavin Cowley and many other great sporting names and some captains of industry that came before you, you would have been aware of them, and there must have been something that you felt you had to live up to as well, surely.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's some leading lights, Apollox, Gav, all these guys that led the way. I suppose that they sort of taught us that anything was possible, and if we could come through the grey and still be successful, and still reach the heights that we strive to dream about, and I think these guys led the way to do that.
And Gavin, if I could bring you in here, when you first became aware of Michael Catt, what did you make of him? Did you see the magic in him early on?
Yeah, good evening as well to everybody. Mike, great chatting to you down under there in your new role in Australia. I think one of the important elements here, and in fact there's so many of them that one could add into the mix too, as far as Michael Catt's concerned, I sort of like the adage, luck is where opportunity meets preparedness. And Mike spoke about the word respect, which I really quite like. And I think it has a strong role to play in the game of rugby union, no question about that. But I suppose at the end of the day, Mike, one would want to ask the question too, with your mom being English, it obviously made the journey to England a little bit easier. But did you see a vision for yourself here in South Africa before you went to England?
100%. I only grew up wanting to play for the green and gold. I remember one of my first club games for Crusaders in Port Elizabeth was against Dani Gerber, and he was this icon. And unfortunately, he wasn't allowed to be on the international stage. But the green and gold was something that I strived for till I was probably 21, 22. The game was amateur, obviously, back then as well, so it wasn't a job. And I just loved what it gave me. I loved how I felt when I played it. It was an escape for me. And I think going to England, like you say, opportunities fell differently for me, and I said yes, and I took them. And a bit fearful sometimes along the route, but ultimately it turned out really well because I loved the game of rugby union.
But also what you carried with that importantly as well, and I come back to that word respect that you used. I think you brought a different dimension to English rugby too, because there were times in that sort of period when maybe there were quite a few lows as well as highs, but you'd always have had an attacking mindset. In other words, your coaching now, which we'll chat about just now, has sort of mirrored the way you played the game with an attacking mindset.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, back in the 90s, England were very much a sort of a 10-man sort of game. Rob Andrew was a 10. Big pack of forwards would dominate, be very, very physical, and there would be a lot of kicking involved in it. I was very fortunate. I ended up in Bath, one of the clubs that was winning everything at the time back in the early 90s. And they pretty much had 12, 13 England internationals playing in their first team. And we played a brand of rugby under Stuart Barnes, Jeremy Guscott, those guys, that was so exciting and suited me. And where you said I had a couple of low patches was when I tried to transfer that into England to the international stage, it was very, very different. So I had to learn very, very quickly that, you couldn't just throw the ball around or play to your strength all the time. You actually have to control a game. So there was a couple of years of learning. And like you say, there were a few proper lows, but I think the highs outweigh the lows.
Mike, the other important element too is that you actually brought another interesting dimension to the game of rugby too, in that I think you were probably a fly half right through your schooling career at Grey, but that you moved to other positions as well and then provided a fair level of dominance there. Was some of that brought about through obviously understudying Barnesy in Bath and then Rob Andrew as well, that you played in different positions? And were any of those positions like standouts for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, being able to play in all those different positions, you pretty much got picked every weekend, and that was my ultimate aim. So whether it was on the bench or whether you're starting in different positions or somebody got injured, I remember Jeremy Guscott got injured for a year the first time I turned up in Bath. That gave me an opportunity in the 13 shirt. Then Stuart Barnes retires. I then moved to the 10. And I think with the different positions, I think a lot of it was down to who I played with. So when you were playing outside a Stuart Barnes at 10, We had Phil de Glanville, myself at 12 and 13. You know, you knew what Stuart Barnes was going to do. When I played with Johnny Wilkinson, outside Johnny as a 12, I knew I could help him. I had that experience that Johnny didn't have at that particular time. So I think that worked really, really well in terms of how I got to those positions and how I moved to those positions and why I enjoyed it so much.
There were so many highlights in your career as well, and we've mentioned them. And statistically, you can have a look at, you know, your 75 caps for England. But I think if you add a few other little interesting things onto that, you know, you have alongside your name an OBE and an MBE, which I think is very special and an indication of a contribution to society or to sport in this particular case, which is really quite special. But I suppose your two of your highlights, I could say, was winning the World Cup in 2003. And then in 2007, I think I'm right in saying that you are still today the oldest man to have ever played in a World Cup final. I think you were 36 years of age, but in pretty good shape at that point in time.
Yeah, I was a lot smaller than the other South Africans across the pitch from me in the final, to be honest, by that stage. But yeah, and again, I think when you love something so much, Gav, that you just keep going. And I wanted to go into coaching at the back end of my career, and I didn't really know how to do it because I didn't want to give the game up. I loved the feeling of Friday night into a Saturday. I loved the feeling of running out in front of 80,000 people and millions of people watching it on telly. There was this real, almost like a drug effect on the back of it. And I absolutely loved every single minute of it. Didn't say that I wasn't nervous and petrified playing up against some of the teams, but I loved it. And I still do, you know, I finished club rugby at 39, internationally 36, and I still wish I probably could have gone a year, especially at club. But also going into club and coaching it and playing at that age, it's so much easier to coach players around you. So I had an Anthony Watson, a Jonathan Joseph, these guys, Johnny Wilkinson's, these guys around me, that it's so much easier to coach them when you're on the pitch with them. You know, you don't have to stand in front of a classroom or anything like that. You can just tell them on the hoof. So that made it so much easier for me to coach.
There's been a very, very neat graduation, one's got to say, from player to coach. And, you know, at some point in time, everybody has to give up the game. You can't play forever, especially a physical game like rugby. So your coaching has taken you, you know, obviously to London Irish, where you played a lot of your rugby too, the England, Ireland, Italy as well. And now you found yourself down under in Australia, also helping the Waratahs to get back to the strength that they previously had. How have you found the coaching element? Is this something that you feel you can add a lot of value to, which obviously you can? And along the way, you've acquired or haven't lost that Bath accent of yours. I thought you might have a little bit of Italian in you.
Si, signor. Yeah, the coaching has been a funny journey for me. You know, again, opportunities arose at a really early time in the coaching. The England job, you know, I've been very fortunate to get some of the best jobs in the world at a really young age, and work with some incredible people, some really good people, and guys that I've learned a lot from. I've obviously traveled the world on the back of it as well. But I think my coaching, what I've sort of come to is I just coach how I played the game. So a lot of it would be, and I know it sounds, you know, everybody talks about decision making and all this, but it's the process on how to do it. You've got to coach it. How calm you can be. That's a big one I did worked with Andy Farrell in Ireland, was, you know, how calm can we get these individuals to be in the heat of the battle against your Springboks, against your New Zealand teams, and making good decisions. So all these things have evolved, but I've pretty much coached how I played, and I just broke it right down to how I played the game as a player, my processes, and I've just coached that, and ultimately the game's gone very structured in different ways. But the way I sort of coach is whatever structure a coach gives you, you should be able to fit in and make good decisions on the back of it.
That's a wonderful continuation as well of a very legitimate and a very fantastic rugby career that you've had up to now. I often gravitate towards people who have a lot of input that actually continue to help the cause. And when I think about rugby players, when they stop playing now, some of them might say, well, we quite rugbyed out, and then they move just into something else. But obviously there's a great contribution that some people can continue to make, which is what you are showing from your days of playing and now in coaching. If we go back to the school that we went to, and you say to yourself, okay, well, what sort of message could I send out to grey boys when it comes to sport and in this particular instance, rugby?
Yeah, I think the big one for me is dream big. You know, you look at Sia, you know, what he's achieving or has achieved and what he's achieving now. You know, you guys have done what I've achieved. If you love something, you can go and get it. It is hard work, and you've got to carry some big old punches along the way, and it doesn't go your way, especially in professional sport. And if you love something, you'll keep doing it as well. And I find the whole coaching thing is why a lot of the IP rights from these top internationals don't get put back into the game is for you to be an international player, as you well know, Gav, is you've got to be selfish. You've got to be selfish. It's about you. It's about you getting yourself to a certain level where you can compete with the best in the world. When you become a coach, it's not about you anymore. It's about 45 other kids that you've got to try and drive and steer to the heights that you got to. And that's what really, really excites me. And this is where I find a lot of guys can't coach that have played at that international level, is because it's not about them. It's about the other kids now. But yeah, dream big for me. You know, I dreamt of holding that World Cup rugby trophy back in 1987 when I was running on the beach at St. Francis Bay. I had this big water tower, and I saw this, and that was my World Cup trophy. And I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I just kept going, and then the opportunities came, and I was very fortunate to do that at the age of 32. So, you know, dream big and work hard.
That's a wonderful message that you send to all the current grey boys, and in fact, even some of those, of course, that have left school. So we have to finish off here, Michael. You need to go and sleep as well in your new home in Sydney. We wish you every luck in New South Wales with your coaching as you continue the good work you're doing for the game of rugby. And I want to leave with a question to you, and maybe a little bit of a message that you could offer. How do you want to be remembered?
Somebody that loved what he did. Somebody that was so passionate and committed, and somebody who has had the most amazing journey due to the game of rugby union.
Super interview. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you also to Michael Katz. Joining us next on Behind Our Badge, Neil Bealby, Deputy Headmaster of Grey, Director of Sport for more than 2 decades. It's been quite an innings. Neil, you're well known in these parts. I think to start with, your thoughts on that unique Grey culture and ethos.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unique. I've been very fortunate to be part of the whole Grey experience for the last 23 years, and it's wonderful to have been there.
And how many more years are still in the Neil Bealby career at Grey, or are likely? Are you grooming the next generation?
I'm afraid today is virtually my last day.
Oh dear.
When I say my last day, is that I retire as Deputy Headmaster and Head of Sport now, and Andrew Bain has been named as my replacement. But next year I'm fortunate enough to actually just carry on teaching my accounting.
Okay, well I know Gavin will have a few questions for you. Before we get to him, could you pick out a highlight or two looking back as you wrap up this chapter of your career?
Sure. There's so many highlights, very difficult to do that. If I think back to our 150th, 2006, I was fortunate enough to chair the organising committee. And there were so many highlights that year. I think of the opening of the AstroTurf, the cricket day that we actually had we had 12 different old boy teams, and we had a old grey masters side against a traditional rivals side, where you had players like Dennis Hobson, who sadly passed away just recently, Graham Pollock was in attendance, etc. There were just so many legends of the game, Dave Callahan, etc.
Gavin, if I could bring you in from your side, any questions that you might have for Neil from your peculiar perspective and having been in Grey yourself?
Yeah, I've got 1,000. How much time we got?
Thanks, Gavin.
Neil, great seeing you this evening, and you know, we wish you plenty of luck as you say you move out of your current role. But I know that you're a true educationist, and that you will still, you know, have plenty of arrows in that quiver of yours. To keep going and to keep doing things. Since 2003, you've really been lucky in that you know, you've been up to deputy headmaster right now, as we said as well, but also as head of sport, you know. And if we look at sport, I think essentially we could say that sport is very much an educational driver, although the other two elements of your schooling days as well, which is academics and culture, are also extremely valuable, and perhaps one of the, or at least one of the primary reasons why we actually go to school. With sport being a big driver, if we have to look at the other two elements, it's quite easy, I think, to have a look at sport and say, well, you know, we can measure things. We can measure the success. We can measure this, the number of guys who do this and do that and that sort of thing. But what about culture and academics? Do you have measurement criteria that are utilized for those two elements of the triumvirate?
Yeah, I think we mustn't forget that the school motto is Tria Junta in Una, which is body, mind, and spirit. And we aiming, and Grey has certainly aimed over all the years to produce well-rounded young men. And so, and obviously the core area of schooling is the academic side. How do you measure it? Obviously, there are so many old boys who have gone on to great heights in business, in the academic world, etc. But I suppose in recent times, we think of 2022 when we had the top two students in the Eastern Cape, Kian Klaassen and Dan Ristow. And just to mention a little bit about Dan Ristow is quite an incredible young man in that he was not only the top academic, but he also played provincial hockey and hockey and cricket, and was deputy head boy, and at this stage is excelling at Stellenbosch University. Last year, academically, the accounting department and the biology department were in the top 10 in the country. So, and then I suppose another way that you could try and gauge academics is that your bachelor's pass. There 85%, around about 85% of our boys in the last 5 years have achieved bachelor passes. So that means that 85% of our boys are eligible to go to university. Then just to touch on the spirit side, which loosely you could maybe say is the cultural side, we obviously got all our societies, etc. But we also have an incredibly strong music department, which is really doing well. Under the guidance of Mr. Sean Lyon, we've got an orchestra and a wind band, which is probably about 90 boys strong. And I think I'd challenge any other school in the country to actually beat that.
Neil, I reckon too that I've always said that, you know, I think teachers, there's something special about being in the teaching profession in that you see the emergence of young boys in this case, and ultimately some of them reaching great heights. It must give you a real thrill to be able to see a Tristan Stubbs or a Matthew Breetzke playing cricket for South Africa now, having gone through the school at a time when you were there. I'm pretty sure that must be quite special for you.
It's incredibly special to see those boys that you've watched, you know, from the age of 14, and on a Saturday afternoon when you turn on your TV screen, there you have Sia Kolisi playing for the Springboks, and as you say, you got Matthew and Tristan Stubbs playing cricket for South Africa, as well as, and on this trip now to India, Luto Sapamla has also joined that group. But yeah, I've been very fortunate to see so many players develop over the years. When I first started, as you said, I started in 2003. I just missed out on seeing the likes of Luke Watson and Johan Buerta, who finished just before I arrived. But I then was fortunate enough in my first year to be with the first cricket side, where we had Dave Callahan as our senior pro, as the adult player, and also in that team was Rusty Daron. Rusty also then went on to play for South Africa, and then in the last 20 years, there've been quite a number of boys that I've seen to go on to play cricket for South Africa. Wayne Parnell, I always remember Wayne Parnell coming into the first team in grade 10, left arm bowler, very much medium pace. The wicketkeeper used to stand up to him in the first term. By the fourth term, he developed so much that he actually opened the bowling for SA schools, and then went on to captain SA school, the SA under-19 side in a World Cup final. There was also Eddie Moore. A few years later, Eddie was a very small, young student in grade 8 and 9, but as he got bigger, he just grew into a wonderful left-handed batsman. Sadly, at this stage, he's only played one test. I think he's probably deserving of playing more. And then, as we mentioned, Tristan Stubbs. Tristan, interestingly, sorry, I just lost my earpiece here. Tristan, interestingly, he was almost a late developer. Tristan, at under 15 level, he scored 150, and he only really blossomed in grade 11 and 12. And obviously, since then, he's done incredibly well, and what a huge talent. Matthew was always a superb player from a very young age, from junior school days. What he's achieving now is what was always expected. He scored the most centuries for the first 11. He scored 17. Incredible cricketer. Then there's also just on the you've got Tian van Vuuren in the SAA side. You've got Colin Ackerman, who's just finished his career with Holland. And then just to move to one or two of the other sports, obviously rugby, Sia Kolisi, an absolute icon of the nation. And at school, you could see the talent was definitely there. He was a prefect and then captained the first 15. Other rugby players that was fortunate enough to watch, there was JJ Engelbrecht, who sadly in his matric year was injured for quite a while, but also a wonderful player. And then there was Sergil Peterson, also became a Springbok. Sergil wasn't just a rugby player, he was also a sprinter and an athlete. I remember in grade 11, he went across to France to the World Athletics Champs. And then the one game that I can always remember clearly with Sergil was actually under 14As. Under 14As against Grey College, Sergil scored 5 tries. And I think we managed to sneak in still by just a point or two with these 5 tries. And then probably the most exceptional schoolboy rugby player that I saw at Grey was probably Kerwin Bosch, an exceptional talent. Then on the hockey front, we've always been very strong hockey-wise. At the moment, Luke Winford is in the national side, but maybe I'd just like to mention one person from prior to my time at teaching at Grey, and that would have been Wayne Graham. Just a reminder, Wayne was the first SA captain after post-apartheid, to go to the World Cup, to captain the South African team. And then, of course, there's also Kevin Cree, who's got the most caps. But there's so many different memories from so many different sportsmen. If I think of the aquatics, Christopher Reed, exceptional swimmer who went to the Olympics. And then I also remember Kevin Paul. Kevin won gold at the Beijing Olympics. I remember the whole school actually got together in the hall and actually watched him on a big screen actually win gold. And then also Jason Everzard, the South African water polo player, also an incredibly intelligent young man.
Yeah, the list goes on, doesn't it? I suppose we could.
Yeah, my apologies to those that I've left out.
Yeah, Neil, I'm also pleased that we haven't just spoken about rugby and cricket tonight. We've actually expanded it into other sporting codes too. And just while we're talking about sport as well, just a question to you in that I know when I was at school, we didn't play any sport against Grey College in Bloemfontein. That only started in 1974. Um, and it's obviously a very special occasion for both schools. My question would be Auckland Grammar, which is the third school that was founded by Sir George Grey. Um, has there ever been a discussion around potentially the three schools playing a triangular or something like that?
I think it would be quite a costly weekend, but we actually did have talks. I remember at the 150th in 2006, we tried our best to actually get them to come out to the rugby festival, which unfortunately the timing didn't work for that. But they did in 2006 bring their first cricket side, and the first cricket side actually played in Cape Schools Week. Obviously, the Grey College, Grey High weekend is still very, very special, but and many of you old boys would obviously remember the wonderful train trips. Sadly, that fell away in 2010, and so at this stage, we obviously just pass between Bloemfontein and Port Elizabeth. But in today's Derby weekends, you've got about 10 different sports and activities, from mountain biking, golf, to your normal hockey and rugby. From a hockey perspective, what's become quite special throughout the country is Friday Night Lights, where you actually have 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people watching a hockey match. But obviously, the ultimate is still the final rugby game on Saturday afternoon.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Gavin.
Yep.
Behind Our
I just
Badge
wanted
is
to
made
throw out
possible.
one other thing, Daron. Just one other quick question, and that is, or maybe it's more a statement than anything else, Neil. But I don't live in Port Elizabeth or Tobacco anymore. I live down in Cape Town, but I was at the school a couple of weeks ago, and I was very impressed by the wonderful facilities, how good the facilities are looking. So I think, in terms of maintaining those high standards and ultimately developing leaders, I'm sure must be two very important things for the school.
Definitely. I think Grey have always managed to produce confident young men, and I think from that sort of confidence, leadership comes quite naturally to them. And certainly, as you say, the facilities are unbelievable. I challenge any place to see a better Pollock Oval front cricket field. It's superb, and so is the Khaleesi.
Go,
Behind
Daron.
Our Badge. Thank you. Have I got the green light, Gav?
Yeah, you got it, boy.
A word in favour of our sponsors, Behind by the kind and generous support of our friends at Cerebos.
Other areas of Limpopo will also be very warm over Limpopo.
Thank you very much to our friends from Cerebos. We've got Devin Neal, who's one of their marketing assistants, joining us on Behind Our Badge. Devin, thank you very much for your patience. How's it going?
Finding yourself. Thank you so much for obviously giving us the opportunity to show some face and bring some salt flavoring to your pots and pans.
And a little prize as well. Looks going to go the way of one of our viewers later on this evening.
Yeah, hopefully, luckily, one of our viewers stands the chance to win a soda stream to sparkle up your Halo water at home and to have like sparkling water or still water as your preference.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get to the beginning here. Cerebos, 80 years of flavour in South African homes. You're celebrating 80 years of business this year. Well done.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we've been celebrating 80 years, and as time goes on, we try to expand and try to move on more to be more sustainable. Through the years, 80 years of being a household brand,
Yeah.
being a key brand in households, I can guarantee you 99% of the viewers actually watching now will be very familiarized with this with the Cerebos floss that we actually have on shelf. Growing through 80 years in household and flavoring pots and pans has brought Cerebos becoming like a household brand.
Oh, it's an icon.
Through generations and generations of people.
Okay, so outside of the salt, though, you've also started manufacturing water. And you've got a brand called Halo Water, very, very distinctive branding. And I'm sure most people will have spotted it in the stores. Tell us a bit, where does it come from? How did you get into the water game? Where does it come from? How do you, from start to finish, what's the story with Halo Water?
Okay, so it can be quite a difficult process to explain, but I'm going to try and make it very easier for most viewers and try not to use the hard terms and everything. So with Halo Water, through the years, we decided to with your salt, we don't just necessarily just have it in salt pans and just let it sit for weeks to dry out completely. So what we decided to do is basically we let it sit in the salt pans for a couple of days, so it forms like a nice brine. It's fully saturated in sodium, and then we pump that through to our pure vacuum dry plant. In that plant, so we basically are to make it easier for the average person listening, we call it a massive pot that is boiling, or kettle. As you know, if you boil kettle water or salt water, the salt crystallizes at the bottom and the water evaporates on top. We capture that, and in the past we didn't really use it. It went to waste, so we decided to, as a byproduct, why not basically use this and bottle this water? As South Africa has its own water scarce problems, and Eastern Cape is struggling with water, we decided why not use this product as a byproduct and basically have a very good pure product on shelf, which is also very cost effective to the average consumer.
Okay, now you don't stick around for 80 years if you don't know how to reinvent yourselves. And it seems to me, from newspaper reports and looking around, that Cerebos are going green these days. You're using solar. Talk to us a bit about that. Your plant's invested quite heavily in solar.
Yeah, so what Cerebos has done, as time evolves, we also need to evolve with the time. We decided to partner up with Avianto Energy, using them as our EPC, and then as well as Hubble Energy as well. And we set up a solar system for the plant to run basically 2.5 megawatts of power to our plant to reuse renewable energy or reusable energy.
Good for you.
To our plant. It's more environmentally friendly, and we're trying to go more green in that way. And the same as the Halo Water, we're trying to, instead of wasting a product, we're trying to use a product and give it back to the consumer where we can use it, which will benefit the actual consumer.
Okay, so Cerebos is going green. They do salt, they do Halo Water. Who knew they've moved into instant noodles as well?
So we have branched out to quite a lot of products. So Cerebos is also quite known for just being salt. But a lot of people don't understand, listen, we're more than just salt. We've branched out to instant noodles with our street food seasoning flavoring. We use a local company for the noodle cake, and then with the street food seasoning, sorry, it's upside down. There you go. So with the street food seasoning that we decided to use our flavoring in our noodles, as we also do brass salts, salt and pepper, the water, and we invested highly into noodles for being nutritional for a bunch of people in South Africa. Due to, we know there is quite a struggle of hunger. That's why we also decided to get involved in a company like, for example, AfriSave with their feeding scheme. We try to move into helping the low communities that can't afford, and children that doesn't have a meal, to get that out there as well. And yeah, like I said, we're trying to just expand a bit more and trying to help local people, as we are a local company in the Eastern Cape, Port Elizabeth. So we're trying to just expand a bit and then support local residents in basically PE.
And I'm very pleased to report that in addition to sponsoring our first Behind Our Badge show this evening, Cerebos are also making available a case or possibly a couple of cases of their noodles to Msengeni Primary School in KwaZakele, which is the primary school that Sia Khaleesi went to. What a lovely touch, man. Thank you so much.
That is so awesome. And we're trying to, like I mentioned before, we're trying to see how we can support local. As most residents in Port Elizabeth supports us, trusting us to flavor and enhance their food at home, we just decided to give back to the people that actually support us.
Beautiful stuff. Nice to have you with us in studio, and thank you so much for support from Cerebos. Pass on our best wishes to the team.
Awesome.
Thank you, Devin. Devin Neal, he's a marketing assistant from Cerebos. We return now to famous and well-known Grey alumni, a man who shares with Gavin Cowley the fact that he played provincial rugby and provincial cricket for Eastern Province, and very, very well known in these parts, larger than life fella by the name of Dave Callaghan. Callas, are you with us?
Of course, this is the highest score by any South African in limited overs internationals, and this one's gone for 6. Well, he's just ripping up the record books, Dave Callaghan. The previous highest score by a South African in one-day international cricket was 112. You'll see on the Bank of New Zealand replay, just leaned back into the shot and wafted it over long on for 6 runs.
And so he's got it up in the block hole, except this time it's a full toss. So what he tried to do was right, but you can't stop this man.
This is a magnificent innings. No matter what he touches today is going to turn into boundaries towards the end of the innings. 4 off.
Dave Callaghan, welcome to Behind Our Badge. How are you, my friend?
Hello, Daron. Nice to see you again.
I bet you say that to all the boys. Callas, we were just saying you're in a special club who represented Eastern Province at both rugby and cricket. It's not likely to happen again, given the professional era of sport. But just reflect back on those days and how Grey influenced those outcomes.
Yeah, obviously, I had a great schooling career, and I was fortunate to go to a number of other schools in the Eastern Cape before I arrived at Grey in Standard 5. And that was just the rounding for me. I had, I can't tell you how many wonderful coaches, how wonderful masters that they were at the school that gave me the direction that I needed to perform on the sports field, And then, when we come to cricket, I recall, from when I was in Standard 7 playing in the Grey first team and playing against men in the first league, and that was just, you were so much more hardened. So that when you went on after school to play provincial rugby or cricket and that type of thing, you were used to playing against men. You know what I mean? So it was the best grounding that I could have ever had. And as I've mentioned to so many people, many years. If I think of the likes of the coaches that I had Jeff Cook playing as a master, the England opening batsman. He used to play for Grey. Uncle Ath McKinnon, he was a coach. The school always was able to get outside people. Mike McCauley, he came in and helped me with my bowling when I first arrived. Can you believe it? I was actually a wicket keeper when I arrived at Grey, and a master said to me, "We've already got him wicket keeper. So can you bowl?" So I took the ball and I bowled, but I was bowling no balls and wides and everything. And they eventually got Mike McCauley to come in and help me with my run up and my direction. So it's just been a wonderful time. It was a wonderful time to be at the school. Yeah.
Gavin Cowley, from your perspective, does much of what Callas is sharing with us resonate with your career as both provincial cricketer and rugby player?
Yeah, there's always similarities. I think when you look back at later years, in David's case, I'm a bit older than him, really, really good to hear. I mean, lovely to see there as well that 169 that he got against New Zealand, which was a very, very special innings. But it wasn't the only one. I mean, at the end of the day, Callas, I think you played 176 first-class matches. You got a good couple of hundreds. In fact, I think 1800s and 3750s. So your career was a very, very special one in many ways. But what I really liked about you and your family, your dad was very often refereeing rugby matches that I played in as well, club games anyway. You come from a really strong, background in terms of sport and your family. But what I do like as well is the fact that you have always looked to give back, and I also spent a short period of time as the pro at Grey. But when you finished your career, you're always looking at opportunities to give back. And I'm sure that that's something that you maybe learned at Grey or you learned from your own family.
Yeah, I think look, definitely from my mom and dad were always very supportive through my career, and in a different way. I think these days, I remember the one day I came home and I had an atrocious first team rugby game. I mean, it was just the worst game I could have ever had, and I was looking for this confirmation from him to say to me that I had a good game, and it was probably one of the few games, and I don't mean this nastingly, because he was obviously a rugby referee and he was probably refereeing one of your games against El Collegians or Dispatch or something like that. And I remember I got home, but he was there to watch. And after the game, I remember he said to me, I asked him, I said, Dad, how did I play? And then he sort of gave me a little bit of a background. I mean, he played for Border as well, and he was a rugby player, and he started to tell me a few things. And I said, but Dad, he said, look here, Dave, don't butt me. All right. I'm telling you, and you just take what you want to take away from this conversation, and then we can leave it as that. And those are the sort of things I think I mean, I was listening to Michael Catt earlier, and I think one of the things about Grey was, and I still have it, is you respect your elders, you respect the people that give you that information, and you respect people around you, what their beliefs are, all those type of things. And I think for me, that was one of the most important things. And I mean, Gavin, I mean, I will tell you, that watching you and playing at St. George's and at the Puri Erasmus, there were these icons ahead of us, like yourselves, that we all inspired to be like, So it was just so nice to have heroes in front of you. I mean, Graham Pollock was like, I mean, obviously I wasn't left-handed, but I wish I was a left-hander, because I wanted to be like a Graham Pollock, So we had heroes in front of us, and we just wanted to, we just had those opportunities that no other school that could give us.
From the heroes that you had ahead of you, can I ask you to reflect on those who come after you? A few thoughts on the Bretskis and the Stubbs, the Sapamlas, and many others that followed your career at Grey. I'm sure you follow them quite closely. Colours, your thoughts on how they're developing?
Yeah, like Gavin said earlier on, I gave back to the school, and I didn't give back to the school because I wanted to give back to the school. It was because I wanted to be involved again. And I got involved for a while. It was probably around about 2011 to about 2020. It was probably about 8 or 9 years. I ended up coaching the under 14s for a season, but then realized my son was going to be going from under 13 to under 14, and it was very difficult to be your son's coach, especially in your first year at school, so at high school. So Neil Bilby said to me, why don't I move up to the first team, and help Fred Swarbrook, who was, involved at the school at that. He was the pro coach at then. So for the first year, I helped Fred. And then for about 7 or 8 seasons after that, I helped Richard Gilbert, who's now still the first team cricket coach. And during that time, I mean, I just missed obviously the David Whites, the Ackermans. I played with Rusty Daron years back when I was at the school, but then we had this golden patch of cricketers that came through the school, the likes of the Bretskis, the Tristan Stubbs, Luto Sapamla, and it was so wonderful to be involved and just sharing some of my thoughts with these kids and how to handle the pressure and be calm, exactly what Michael Catt said, because at the end of the day, it is a selfish game. We all know sport is selfish. I always tell people cricket is the most typifies life like you can't believe it. You're selfish, but in the same time you have your teammates around you as well. So and if you're successful, your team's successful. So within reason, you need to be a team man, but also be very selfish for you to succeed.
We wish you all the best going forward, and thank you very much for your time joining us on Behind Our Badge this evening, colours. There's going to be more cricket as we catch up with Mike van Vuuren. Gavin Cowley will also share thoughts on the legacy of probably the greatest left-handed batsman that the world has ever produced in Graham Pollock. Have a good evening, colours. Thanks for joining us. Oh, excuse me. Joining us now on Behind Our Badge, we have Mike van Vuuren. Do I need to introduce you, Mike? You've got a storied and fabled career of your own. Most people, I think, probably think of you as a tear-away fast bowler back in the day and a big-hitting lower-order batsman.
Well, I think in this particular instance, thank you, Daron. In fact, let me go back a step. Thank you. Nice to be here. I think in this particular instance, Gavin is probably a bit more qualified than I am to talk about Graham Pollock. In fact, I think I'm a bit underqualified to talk about Graham being the genius that he was. So it might be an idea to involve Gav here.
All right. Well, is Gav hiding away? Gav, come on. This is definitely an area where you hold all the trump cards. The greatest left-handed batsman. I know that there are people who would argue the point. South Africans won't. But what a genius Graham Pollock was. Your thoughts?
Yeah, he was. When I first started playing for Eastern Province, and I was still very young, when we went down to the cricket nets, I would always be glancing at Graham Pollock and hoping that he would, being a left-hander myself, hoping that he would give me some tips or whatever it was that was needed, to improve my game. And he never did. But I found with Graham, though, if you went and asked him something, he'd obviously give you the answer, But I mean, I think with those geniuses, they're in another world. And I can tell you about that other world too, because I got into trouble with both him and his brother. My very first game for Eastern Province, I was in Standard 9, playing against Western Province at Newlands. And, I just made the SA school side, and it was probably a little bit early for me to be in that team. But I addressed them as Mr. Pollock. And Peter Pollock had a full go at me, and he said, "You don't call me Mr. Pollock. My name's Peter." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he looked at me, and off we went, But the very first time I batted with Graham, I came to the wicket, and he said to me, "Can you count to 5?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Okay, the next ball, run like hell." Because he was a master of stealing a single off the last ball of an over, normally ending up that you could acclimatize quite well at the wicket without facing a ball for a couple of overs, But I think, Mike can also talk a little bit about having bowled him. I also bowled to Graham. And, after he'd left Eastern Province and went up to what was then Transvaal, Mike, of course, also bowled against him. And, Mike, I mean, we know about that. You're not going to get him out LBW because no one's prepared to give him out LBW. Where do you bowl to him? How do you bowl to him? Challenge.
Well, Gav, a very interesting story. In 1985, I was fortunate to have been invited to play in a Clive Rice benefit game. It was a Nottingham side with three, Mark Rindle, myself, and Dave Norman. And after the game, there was a conversation that largely revolved around Graham Pollock. And I think it was a guy called Bruce French, the wicketkeeper, who asked Clive Rice about, they were talking about his cover drive, which we all know was legendary. And Bruce French said, if he had this great cover drive, why didn't you drop the fielders 10 or 12 meters further back or deeper? And Clive Rice said Lawrence Rowe had done that the year before. And he was still hitting the ball through them or past them. And then he asked the question, going back to the point you raised about where you bowled him. And the question then arose, well, why don't you just bowl backward of a length? And I think, as you well know, he'd just whoop you over mid-wicket then. So once he got going, he was very, very difficult to bowl to. And there was an incident at St. George's, I think it was on my debut, And if I'm not mistaken, Kenny Watson was the bowler. And I was at mid-on, and he sort of rocked forward, and you thought, oh, he's going to unleash a big cover drive here. And he realized it wasn't quite there to drive, and he, in that same motion, he just rocked back and ran it fine of third man for 4. And that, to me, is the sign of a genius. To be able to have a double movement in the space of that ball going from the hand to the bat. And I very seldom saw that. Perhaps the only other guy that was capable of that was Daryl Cullinan. I never had the privilege of playing against Barry Richards, but Graham Pollock to me was bittersweet. You know, and when I say bitter, you knew you were going to catch it. And maybe the sweet side of it was actually quite enjoyable watching him compile these hundreds. As I'm sure, I mean, you must have seen him compile many hundreds.
Yeah, with and against, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I can also, we can go back to my sort of early days in Standard 9, grade 11 or whatever it was, when the Springbok cricket side, as they were called at the time, had a net practice before the test match in 1970 at Grey. And we had fantastic net facilities there, looked after by Tom Dean. And when you talk about geniuses, and you mentioned the name just now, Barry Richards too, you know, Barry Richards started taking the mickey out of the bowlers. And there was Mike Proctor, yes, Peter Pollock, all you know, Pat Trimborn, all these guys. And they had a little bit of a I don't know what you would want to call it, but not an argument, but it was a question of, okay, right, let me show you guys how. And he put his bat down, Barry Richards, and he took out the middle stump. And he said, come on, bowl, see if you can get me out. And he hit every ball on that stump. He didn't need a bat, you know. Yeah. So you talk about geniuses, you know. I mean, yeah, these guys were geniuses. Wonderful, wonderful players.
Yes.
Can I ask the two of you what the feeling was amongst the cricketing fraternity in the Eastern Cape when Graham made the big move? I think it was about 1977 or so, when he moved to Transvaal. I know the cricket fans here were absolutely devastated, but from a playing point of view, how did you guys react? How did you take to that?
If I may come in there, Gav, if you don't mind. That particular season, there was a story going around that he was determined to prove to the Joburg people or the Transvaalers that he could really play. And ironically, after, I think it was 3 Currie Cup matches, he was averaging 37 with a top score of 70. There were 4 innings, 150 odd runs, 70, 67, I think 3 and 11, which was very un-Pollock-like. And ironically, he finished that season averaging 96. And he had scored 233 in the 4th game, then came to Port Elizabeth, which happened to be my debut. And I can tell you now I had a sleepless night because you knew you were going to catch something along the way. He got 139. Then we went to Joburg for the return game. He got 143, got 112 against Natal, I think it was, and 103 not out against Rhodesia. And that, I think, just underpins the man's greatness. You know, to recover from an average of 37 and end up averaging 96. You know, really just shows.
And still able to play. I think I'm correct in saying he played first-class cricket until he was 44? There or thereabouts?
Yeah, I think that 144 he made in 87. He was 42.
And that was at St. George's against the Rebel Aussies.
Yeah, in fact, Gary's got some clips of that. You know, we might want to use it as overlay, but he was 42 years old, if I remember clearly, and he was up against a fairly formidable attack. You might remember the first ball he received from Rodney Hogg, he actually nicked. But being the genius that he is, most of us nick the thing and it goes straight to the keeper's gloves. His went down and Steve Rickson, diving to his left, it bounced before him. And he never looked back and scored the 144 as a 42-year-old.
This forcing square drive, absolutely superb. The heavy weight of the bat, helping Pollock. Cover drives of the highest quality. And the short balls were put away contemptuously, through the leg side as well. Finally, with his score on 144, Hogg sneaked one through his defences.
Gavin Cowley, you'll remember the innings, no doubt. Were you in St. George's on that special day?
Yeah, I watched a lot of Graham too on different occasions and that. And I think Terry Alderman's still trying to find that ball that got whacked all over the field. He got stuck into the Australians. And I think, the one thing with Graham is you could say that everybody was trying to work out how to bowl to him, how to get him out. And I think everybody spent their whole cricketing career trying to find that solution and never found it. He just had that incredible ability. And he's just such a proud product of the Grey School too. And that's one of the good things about Graham. He always gave back, even after he'd moved to Johannesburg. And there was some need, or there was something that he could also offer down at the Grey School. He was first up. He was always there. He was at the 150th celebration too. So really a wonderful servant of the school, and of course a wonderful servant of South African cricket. Well, we should say world cricket, because he really was quite special, and maybe, arguably the best left-hander that ever played the game.
Very well said, Gav.
I'm sure we all are united in wishing Graham best of health. I know he's up in Johannesburg, in his early 80s at the moment. I understand there have been a few health challenges of late, but he is fighting it. So, Graham, if you do get to watch this, best of luck, man. Fight that, keep playing that innings. From cricket, we move to rugby. We catch up with a man who, no matter what it is that he does for the rest of his life, I think he is destined to be remembered as the man who brought Siya Kolisi to Grey High School. Andrew Hadakis joining us on Behind Our Badge. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for being patient. Andrew, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Daron. All good. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. So, how did it all happen? How did Siya Kolisi, before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, how did Siya Kolisi land up at Grey? How did you manage that?
It goes right back to a under-12 Southern Provincial tournament held in Mossel Bay. And the EP side were playing against the Western Province. And Siya at that stage was playing in the under-12 B team. And two of his schoolmates, Papama and Zolani, were playing in the 12A side. Siya was one of those players, very, very physically very small. For a flanker, he was very small, but he played very cleverly. He ran spaces and definitely not faces, and had very good hand-eye coordination and good offloading skills. And after the game, Papama and Zolani also really impressed me. And we'd made a decision at Grey that we would like to start what we called our outreach development program, where we'd like to afford opportunities for boys, previously disadvantaged boys, to come to Grey and provide them with the opportunity to make the most of their talents. Anyway, after the game, I approached the coach, Mr. Erickson Twiki, who was the headmaster of Msengeni Primary. And later on, Eric and I actually went on and coached the EP Cravenweek on a 13 side together. And I went up to him, I said, Eric, we'd like to offer these boys scholarships to Grey Junior. And I remember Eric very clearly says, if you take one, you take all. Excuse me. And went back to Lindsay Pearson, the headmaster. I said, have we got space for 3? And he said, absolutely. And yeah, that was it. Eric took care of the rest. He went and spoke to the parents, and the boys were enrolled at the Grey Junior Hostel, Warring Lodge, for 2004. All 3 played Cravenweek in 2004 before moving on to the high school. And then, the rest is history, I suppose.
Cultural challenges notwithstanding, Andrew, you mentioned that Siya was one of the smallest loose forwards at the tournament. I'm now guessing that there were nutritional challenges that needed to be addressed. And how did you approach those? Because he's a big guy today.
He sure is. Daron, I mean, it's well documented. I think he said, in the evenings there wasn't food for supper, and that his granny would give him sugar water, which would fill him up, and then he'd go to bed on a full stomach. But he moved into the hostel. So the Warring Lodge food, and I think the hostel food at the high school definitely did help him put on weight. I remember he'd talk about going home in the holidays, and Papa and Zolani would actually go and set bird traps and catch pigeons in Zwede, and then they'd braai them in the veld because that was his source of food at that stage. So I know his gran fed him a lot of sugar water, but I think the hostels looked after him, and he gradually got bigger. Under 14 and under 15, he was still very small. And then when he got to under 16, I think he went home. I think he went home at the end of his grade 9 year. I remember him walking up to me. I was busy walking up to the swimming pool, and he came running to me. He said, "Sir, you've got to help me." I said, "Sir, what?" And he said, "I need supplements and I need gym." I said, "No, relax. You're a late bloomer. You'll grow later." Well, he came back in his grade 10 year, and he came back really, really well filled out. Obviously, just a late bloomer, and he really grew, and he really took the rugby field by storm in his under 16 year.
From an old grey perspective, Gavin Cowley, what did you make of this young Siya Kolisi as the world started noticing him?
Andrew, good seeing you, chap. On screen, but if you are hearing me, I think I could. Yep, there we go. I think I can add something there to the fact that I think part of that growth of Siya Kolisi had to do with the braaiplaces that he attended at Mike van Vuuren's house.
Yes.
So Mike he's now relinquished that seat that he had there, but Mike's eldest son, Michael, who's a wonderful rugby player, he and Siya Kolisi were very friendly at school, and Siya used to spend a lot of time at
how do we want to wrap this up now?
At the Van Vuuren's house, and so be it. But he obviously grew up quite a lot. Andrew, just to mention to you as well, and to give you also some kudos. You taught at Grey at the Grey School. Your dad taught at the Grey School, as well as your grandfather. And let me tell you about that grandfather of yours, Henry Martin. He had a cane, one of those canes, that cane you if you are naughty. It was called Charlie, I think. And we were petrified of that grandfather of yours. He was some teacher, but he had a wonderful love for the school and a wonderful love for sport too, and made a great contribution like you and your father have done or did at Grey. And of course, you also have a close attachment with Grey College. Do you see a lot of similarities?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Gavin, I think when you take the traditional boys' schools in the country, I've heard Mark speaking and Dave speaking, and it's all the same. It's discipline, it's the traditions, the norms, the values, the respect, the self-belief, the friendships. I just think traditional boys' schools are it's a special element in South Africa.
That's wonderful to hear. I want to ask you something else as well about the acquisition role that you had. You've told us a little bit about you mentioned Siya Kolisi and a few others too. Ultimately, when they came to the Grey School and they worked their way through, was their process sort of mapped? Were there things that you could talk about now to say, well, you know what, these guys, they were fantastic students, they were wonderful pupils or learners at the school, and they all got through matric, or they all did this, or they all did that, or this one was a prefect. So, I think would be a highlight, I think, for a lot of people who might be previously disadvantaged, or the outreach program you talk about, that might see opportunity with this sort of thing and turn into really quality young boys.
Yeah, Gavin, most definitely. I mean, I think Sia often gives Adi Makaba a lot of credit. Sia, he did battle. He and Papama did battle. Academically, Adi Makaba really spent hours with them in remedial. We took them out of phys ed and they'd go to Readers for Leaders. So a lot of time was spent with them there. The high school also supported them superbly well with tutors. So it was a point to get them to where we wanted them to be. Zolani got a BA degree. He went on and studied at university. Papama ended up working for HiQ as one of the guys there. Sia's obviously carried on with his rugby, and along with, Neil Bilby mentioned them earlier. I mean, Kerwin Bosch, Sergio Peterson, these are all boys that benefited from this program that we began at the primary school.
If you go back some years, you might want to say to yourself, well, maybe things are a little bit easier now because there are perhaps a lot more benefactors out there. And we think of people like Vincent May, who's done such a wonderful help there for Sia Kolisi, and many others too, of course. Nigel Bands, all these people that have made a contribution back into the school in the form of bursaries or whatever it might be. Is there very much a similar situation at Grey College in Bloemfontein? Are you far more versed than I am in terms of how the school has developed?
Gavin, yes. When I got to the headmaster, Mr. Yuri Keldenas, and I sat down, and he was also keen for this program to get off, to get going. And three of the boys that have really come through at the moment is Benito Huda. He played SS Schools and currently with the Stormers. I don't think Ethan Adams needs any introduction. Ethan Adams came to Grey College Primary under 13 and is just matriculated and is off to the Lions. Pretoria Sikeji. So yeah, we've got the program running here. It's just to provide opportunities for talented sportsmen, and I think all your big traditional boys schools at the moment are doing it, and I think the talent pool is just getting bigger and bigger. And I think rugby in South Africa is just in an awesome place at this stage.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. And just while we're talking about the Lions, your son David, I think, has got a contract as well with the Lions up in Johannesburg. So you're carrying on that great sporting tradition and everything else that goes with the Hatzidakis family. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on the work you've done, not just with Sia Kolisi, but all the others too, and that you continue to do.
Thank you, Gavin. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you also to the other guests who've joined us on this very first copy of Behind Our Badge. John Young, thanks for your input. Thank you to Michael Catt, Neil Bealby, Dave Callahan, and of course, most of my thanks go to Gavin Cowley for putting up with me for the past while. Thank you so much for joining us, folks. Behind Our Badge is going to wrap up with something special, courtesy of our friends and sponsors at Cerebos. We have got this fantastic Halo soda stream to give away, along with a case of Halo still prepared water. And all you have to do to win is to answer the following question in the comment section. First person through with the right answer wins. It's that simple. How many years have Cerebos been in operation in South Africa? We gave you the answer right at the start of the program. How many years have Cerebos been in operation in South Africa? First person through in the comments with the right answer. You've got yourself this beautiful Halo soda stream, and you've also got a case of a Halo still prepared water in BPA-free plastic, nogal, as a prize. Let's get you, how many years has Cerebos been operating in South Africa? Let's get you answering in the comments. First person through will have the prize, and we look forward to hosting you again shortly in our next edition of Behind Our Badge, brought to you by Cerebos.